Welcome back, and thank you for joining Byte-sized DJ as we begin a multi-part series on the topic of white supremacy and how its characteristics can appear in the classroom. White supremacy is such a loaded and intricate term, and there is sometimes a tendency to avoid conversations about it. When people think of white supremacy, they often immediately equate it to the KKK, racial slurs, swastikas, neo-Nazi groups, and hate crimes. But white supremacy is about more than this, including systemic racism. And whether we like it or not, or are even conscious of it or not, we all participate in the system. And while we acknowledge that discussions on white supremacy can be uncomfortable for some, it is important and crucial to the work that we all do to create inclusive and equitable spaces. So, instead of avoiding it, we are going to lean into the discomfort to answer questions like, what is white supremacy? And why you, yes you, should be actively engaged with identifying, calling out, and fighting against it. Then, we'll begin to unpack how white supremacy appears and is upheld in different forms in the classroom, in ways that you may not even know about. Charles W. Mills, a social and political philosopher of race and liberalism, defines white supremacy as a historically developed, systemic, and global system of domination by which white people benefit from the exploitation and oppression of people of color. In his view, it is not just a set of discriminatory practices or attitudes, but a comprehensive and deeply entrenched system of power and privilege. Let's take a closer look at those two terms. Power is defined as the ability to compel the actions or inactions of individuals or groups against their will or contrary to their best interests, needs, and desires. Privilege is defined as unearned access to resources or social power or advantages granted to specific groups because of their membership in that group. With this in mind, let's take a step back and equip ourselves with an understanding of how and why it all started. Religious identity played a significant role in the development of the English slave trade and the creation of racial whiteness. Initially, plantation owners in the North American colonies relied on the labor of European indentured servants who agreed to work for a set number of years in exchange for passage to a new country or other limited benefits. However, the mistreatment of these servants reduced the supply of willing workers, so colonists turned to enslaving Africans to maintain their profitable operations. While both European indentured servants and enslaved Africans experienced harsh working conditions, the treatment of enslaved Africans was much worse and allowed for no personal freedom. Unlike European servants, enslaved Africans were considered property, forced to work without compensation. Rare incidents like Bacon's Rebellion in 1676, where European indentured servants as well as free and enslaved Africans fought together against the colonial government, made plantation owners realize the possibility for European indentured servants and enslaved Africans to unite against oppressive and violent conditions. Plantation owners sought to protect themselves from further uprisings by European indentured servants by granting legal privileges to those who converted to Christianity. Enslaved Africans, denied celebration of their native religion, would sometimes be forced to convert to Christianity without the same benefits. The idea was to buy off allegiance from European indentured servants by providing them with entitlements that set them above enslaved Africans. Towards the end of the 17th century, slave and servant regulation laws began describing the privileged class of converted European indentured servants as white rather than Christians, indicating a significant shift in the development of racial whiteness in the US. So, now that we've given a little background on the creation of white supremacy as both an ideology and a system of practices, you may ask, what does this have to do with me? I wasn't even alive then, and I've never used any racial slurs, nor would I ever hate anyone because of their racial identity. Combating white supremacy requires doing more than just those things. For one, you don't have to display overt instances of white supremacy to participate in more covert ones. Once white supremacy emerged, all people that were racialized as white benefited. And two, You don't have to identify racially as white to uphold white supremacy. We will cover these points in more detail in the upcoming videos of this series. So knowing that, we call you in to learn how to disrupt and dismantle white supremacy in the spaces that you occupy. Not everyone benefits from white supremacy, and not all white people are invested in upholding white supremacy. However, all of us can stand against and actively work to eradicate it. We hope you will continue to follow this series as we unpack white supremacy and make our spaces more inclusive.